Isuzu, a brand that for some reason I struggle to pronounce, and one that you'd be forgiven for not having heard of at all, as, well, they don't make cars anymore, but rather commercial vehicles and pickup trucks. Taking a look at the company's history though, they started building their own cars in 1961, and they were genuinely good-looking upmarket vehicles for the time, albeit not ones sold in massive numbers. After that, their car building history was a little bit more patchy. They spent the entirety of the late 60s getting passed around from pillar to post by various other Japanese manufacturers, before finally settling down with General Motors in 1971, where they will remain in partnership for 35 years. But in the end, Isuzu's passenger car sales would still struggle, despite the efforts of resident advertising character Joe Isuzu. Seriously, get a load of this
shit. It gets 94 miles per gallon city, 112 highway. Its top speed is 300 miles per hour. And Isuzu dealers have millions in stock, so they're selling them for $9.
Sorry, one more.
Buongiorno. I'm the world's greatest race car driver. Recently, I had a little problem here at Monte Carlo, so I switched to this $200,000 Formula Isuzu.
The reality was, though, most of the products Isuzu were selling were a load of badge-engineered nonsense. I know the Trooper was their car initially, but that thing has had more names than Cheryl Cole. And then there was the monstrosity that is the V-Cross. Although, if you ask me, this falls into the Pontiac Aztek category of so ugly it's actually kind of cool. Ultimately, Isuzu would be done with making cars by the end of the 2000s and instead would solely focus on making commercial vehicles and manufacturing their own diesel engines. So that's the scene set, a Japanese industrial brand most notable for their reliable workhorses. And therefore, this particular story begins in 1989, in the most logical of places, the Lotus Formula One team. Yep, between 1989 and 1991, Isuzu were developing an F1 engine, in secret. And when the struggling Lotus team came looking for an engine supplier, they adapted their car to test Isuzu's engine for potential use in the 1992 Formula One season. It was a 3.5 litre V12 that revved to 14,000 RPM and sounded like this. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Unfortunately, the car was 6 seconds off the pace, the Japanese economy collapsed, and Isuzu gave up on its F1 aspirations altogether. So yeah, if you're wondering why you never knew that Isuzu made an F1 engine, that's probably it. However, this did all mean that they had the engine spare and still wanted to find an application for it. So what better use for the engine than putting it into a type of vehicle that they're more known for? A pickup truck. Obviously. Behold, everyone, the Isuzu Como F1 Super Truck. A vehicle so ridiculous that if it was revealed today, they'd probably have to put in big capital letters, "Not clickbait," after its name. But indeed it was a mid-mounted F1 engined, rear-wheel drive, scissor-doored, 4-seater luxury ute. That's quite the combination, and that's before we consider the cultural hodgepodge that this car represents. Of course, it was made by Isuzu, a Japanese brand, who at the time were under American ownership, taking on a body style that's most popular in Australia, designed by a Brit and named after an Italian lake. Check out Mr. Worldwide over here. I'm basically Pitbull. That Brit I mentioned was one Simon Cox, who would later go on to be responsible for the Cadillac CN concept, the Vauxhall VX220, and the V-Cross. We all have off days, okay? I think it goes without saying that it's an odd looking thing. Very 90s in its abject rejection of right angles, and with that long truck bed, it does essentially look like a futuristic bar of soap. Looking to the front, however, and the face might ring somewhat familiar. The 4200R concept from a few years prior was also designed by the same man, and anyone who played Gran Turismo on the PS3 would be familiar with that particular car. But anyway, mid-engined F1 pickup truck. How does that all work, you ask? Well, the V12 was mounted low down underneath the truck bed, and Isuzu had continued development of the engine, so by the time it was in the Como, it was producing 740 horsepower. That power was then sent to the rear wheels via an automatic gearbox. Now, no matter how well thought out this concept was, and it really was, on the inside as well as outside, I don't think I need to explain how this wasn't really going to be feasible in a production sense. It had more power than McLaren F1 a year before that car even came out. Ferrari were 4 years away from releasing the F50 and subsequently proving that even with some of the best engineers in the business, putting an F1 derived engine in a road car was not easy. And even in the modern day, you can ask Mercedes about that. But still, there is a what if here. Had the Como happened a few years earlier, during the Japanese economic bubble, then it could have actually had a chance. Isuzu had real intent here. The only reasons they cited for cancelling the project were economic ones. After all, they did develop the car and engine for multiple years. Isuzu were almost mad enough to do it. And that's kind of beautiful. I'm not going to pretend it was a trailblazer or ahead of its time. It was just simply mad. Instead, it fell to the GMC Cyclone that released in the same year as the Como to pave the way for the supertruck segment. Isuzu shot for the moon, but ultimately fell flat in their mission to be anything more than a utilitarian brand. Maybe that's unfair actually. With a bit of genius outside help, they could have blended their strength for commercial vehicles with those sporting aspirations.
Hammond, you idiot! You reversed into the sports lorry!
But now it's time for that part of the video where we rate how production viable these cars that never made it were. And as I touched on earlier, this one was basically dead on arrival. I know Isuzu had the intent, but whether they could have actually pulled it off, or more pertinently, found customers to buy it, is a different question entirely. The Isuzu Como F1 Supertruck gets 2 brilliant but also slightly creepy 80s adverts out of 5.